Have you ever tried sewing a knit pattern and used the pick a knit ruler on the back to make sure your fabric had enough stretch? And then you double check to make sure that the fabric you were using also matched the suggested fabrics listed on the pattern. So you took the time and you made the effort and you sewed up your project only to find out it didn't quite fit the way that you thought it would. And instead of being a fitted knit dress, it looked more like a lumpy sack. Yeah, I've been there and I've done it more times than I care to admit. But today I'm sharing the method that I use to make sure my pattern and my fabric work together to give me the fit that I want. And it works every time. So keep watching. Hi, I'm Tony and this is So Lounge. Now, I learned about knits the hard way because I didn't ever figure it out in college. Back then, our professors told us that knits were hard and we were not allowed to use them for any of our projects. So as a result, I was kind of scared of knits until 2021 when I decided that I wanted to make a knit travel dress to wear on the plane. This is the very first thing I ever made out of knit. There are 2 different videos on how I made it, and you can go watch them if you want to see the process. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I just kind of guessed on the size. So this one was actually a 16. And then I made a different pattern version, but the same pattern and the same size in green, in this green knit. And you can see that it looks very, very different. And the main thing is the stretch in each of the fabrics that caused the design to look completely different. So I realized something was wrong, and since then I've been working with different patterns to try and figure out the best way to get the fit that I want. Now, one thing which is a constant source of confusion is that knit fabric is not all the same and it does not all stretch the same way. So there's basically 3 main types of knits, and one is a 2-way stretch knit. So jersey is considered a 2-way stretch. What that means is it stretches from side to side, but it doesn't really stretch top to bottom. The other type of knit is a 4-way stretch knit. So that would be a knit that has spandex or lycra added to it. The fiber itself, being like polyester or lyocell, doesn't really make a difference. It's that spandex that's going to give it the extra stretch. So it stretches widthwise and it also stretches lengthwise. So that's going to give you a different fit. And then if you're using a stable knit, which is a type of double knit, or they use those words interchangeably sometimes on the back of pattern envelopes, it's going to be a very stable knit. So it's not going to be floppy and loose. You will have some stretch going in both directions, but basically it's going to hold its shape. So these are some pants. You can see that they're pants. This is made out of Ponte knit, which is a combination of rayon, polyester, and spandex, but it's a very, very stable knit. So this one will give you a completely different fit than the other 2 that I just showed you. Now, when you use knit patterns, they have suggested fabrics, and this is another area of confusion because they will list fabrics that are very different stretch-wise. So this is the pattern we're going to be primarily talking about today. This is McCall's 8058. It is a basic knit dress. There's some different sleeve and neckline variations. I'm going to be making this up at some point soon. And the suggested fabrics are medium weight, moderate stretch knits, such as jersey, cotton knit, novelty knits, and interlock. Now, if we switch over to this pattern, which definitely has like a sweater component to it, the fabrics suggested are stretch knits only, such as interlock, jersey, rib knit, ponte, double knit, sweater knit. So here's the thing. If you use a jersey knit for this pattern, it's going to fit really differently than if you use a ponte fabric. And I just showed you the difference between those 2 fabrics. Likewise, if you use a fabric that has lycra or spandex, it's going to give you a different fit. So this ruler on the back is just kind of a, hey, this is kind of how it should stretch, but I'm going to share a better method for doing this to get the exact percentage of stretch in the fabric you're using, and then figure out how to determine the right pattern size so you get the fit that you want every time. I like to use this stretch ruler from Stitch Buzz. I'm putting a link in the description. There is a discount code. You can head over to the shop on Etsy. Now, the great thing about this is that it gives you actual percentages of how much your fabric is stretching, but it also gives you the measurements. So when you take your fabric and you stretch it on here, you can see like, oh, the stretch is going to add 2 inches to the overall fit of the garment because it's going to be stretching to fit my body. And that's going to help us get the fit that we want. So let's start by looking at my 3 different fabric samples and how they stretch and the percentage of stretch for each one. So I already prepared some 5-inch strips of my fabric. I'm going to fold them in half, and then that fold is going to go against the edge of the ruler. So unstretched, this is 5 inches. And then I'm going to stretch it to see how much stretch is actually in this fabric. So as you can see, I can stretch this from 5 inches to 6 inches and it's not really distorting the pattern. Now, technically I could keep stretching it and it would fit, but the pattern's going to get distorted and I don't want that because it's going to look weird once I actually wear it. So 6 inches is going to give me 20% stretch. So I'm going to write that down over here for the jersey that it's 20% stretch, and that's going to give me 1 extra inch in the overall fit. Okay. Next, we've got the 4-way stretch knit. I've got that cut at the same. I'm going to hold it down over here and stretch it. And this one stretches a lot more. This one stretches 40%. Now I could probably stretch it to about 60%, but as you can see, it's distorting the print and I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to stop here at 40. That's going to be a decent amount of fit for me. I don't want it really tighter than that. And then that's added 2 inches to the overall fit of the fabric. So I'm going to write that down as well, and that's 2 inches. And then let's look at this double knit Ponte fabric, just to show you for comparison how this is going to fit. So this is very stable, and it's going to stretch about 10%. So that means it's going to be a 1/2 inch bigger than my regular measurements. Now this is where some math comes in. And remember I said we are using this McCall's pattern specifically, but you can use this technique for any type of knit pattern you have to get the better fit. So I took my measurements. I have a 36-inch bust, a 30-inch waist, and 39-inch hips. Still working on losing some weight to get those numbers a little bit lower, but for now, that is where I am. So usually, having done this before, I know that a 14 generally fits okay. It's not a giant sack, but it's usually not quite as tight as I want it to be. So what I did was I copied the pattern measurements that are on the very top of the flap, or sometimes they're on the actual envelope, onto my paper to make a chart. So I wrote down the 14 measurements. I also wrote down the measurements for a size 16, 1 up, and a size 12, 1 down. And this will make sense why I did this in just a second. So for my measurements, a pattern size 14 is a 36-inch bust, but then the 16 has the 30-inch waist and the 40-inch hip. So that is an inch bigger than my hips, but that's going to be closer than the 14, which is an inch smaller than my hips. Next step is to go to the finished measurements on each size. So once I wrote these out, I realized that the pattern envelope only has the bust and the hip measurement, which means I had to go inside the envelope, find the marking on the waist, which was right here somewhere. Oh, there's waistline is marked. So you just find like the little circle with the cross through it. And then you copy down the size for the waistline and add it to the chart. So the finished measurements on the size 14 is going to be 36-inch bust, a 33-inch waist, and a 39.5-inch hip. So you can see that the finished garment measurements are going to be closer to my actual physical measurements than the 16, because the 16 would be 38-inch bust, which is going to be 2 inches bigger than my bust. That is not going to work in knit fabric. We know that for sure. But then I also wrote in the size 12 measurements. So a size 12 bust measurement for this pattern is 34 inches. A waist is 31. And the hip is 37.5. Now, why does this matter? Because this is where we start factoring in how much stretch our fabric has and which pattern size we want to go with, because these patterns do not take into account the individual knit stretch. It's just generally on the back of the envelope, like if you can fit it into this, it should work. But the finished garment measurements are what clue you into the fact that they have not adjusted for the negative ease. Negative ease is what knit fabric does. It stretches more than the actual fabric. So if you were using a woven fabric, you need that ease so that you can actually get it on and wear it without being squeezed to death. Knits are different. And for some reason, they don't really tell you this in any of these patterns. And we're talking about big four patterns here. A lot of indie patterns will tell you that negative ease is built into the finished measurements. So in that instance, you don't have to go through this process. But if you're using McCall's or Simplicity or Butterick or any of the big four patterns, you need to take this into account so that you get the fit you want. Looking at my fabric swatches is, well, this is the 4-way stretch, 40%. That means I'm getting 2 extra inches of stretch from this fabric that I need to go and add to the finished garment measurements. So if I look at the size 14, where I have a 36-inch finished garment measurement, and I add in 2 inches of stretch, that means the bust is actually going to be a 38 and it's going to be loose. It's not going to fit like this, like I want it to, because it's knit. But if I go down to the size 12, that's a 34-inch bust, which means adding in the stretch will give me the 2 inches that I need. Now, if I'm using the jersey is only going to give me 1 inch extra. Can this stretch more? Probably. We probably could get it to be the 2 inches that I need, but then the pattern starts distorting. So then that's where you have to figure out, okay, do I want to go with the smaller size and adjust the seam allowances to give me that little bit of extra stretch that I need, or do I just want to wear it a little bit tighter? Totally up to you. Depends on how you like to wear your clothes. But if I was using this Ponte knit, this only has a 1/2 inch stretch. So I definitely would want to make whatever I'm making as close to my actual measurements as possible, because I'm only going to get an extra 1/2 inch from this. So looking at this with the jersey, I could have a 35-inch bust with a 32-inch waist and a 38.5 hip, which is going to be a tiny bit tight for this fabric. But if I switch to the 4-way stretch knit, it would work. So that's one thing you need to consider is how much does your fabric stretch? How many extra inches is it going to give you? And then figure out what the finished measurements are going to be so that you can add that extra stretch in and get the fit that you want. Now that you know how to get the pattern sizing right to go along with the fabric you want to use, you totally want to check out this video coming up next. I give you all my best tips for sewing with knits, and you're going to love it, and it'll be super useful. I'll see you over there.